Hello everyone, this is your friend Sai Yan Paradox Audio Fanfic. What if Raditz escaped death? The Dragon Ball timeline was rewritten. Part 1. The cries of the young child below meant little to him. At last, he could grab something to eat. Raditz had been starving now for hours, his Saiyan appetite ravenous for food, even if it was just scraps he could find. Kakarot had been easy prey, ridiculously so. Vegeta's plan to have him brought back into the fold was going to do what for them exactly? Already, Raditz was having second thoughts about all this. There were some residual thoughts of the fact that Kakarot was his sibling. However, to be blunt, Raditz was a professional. He would kill Kakarot if need be, and re-educate the boy and replace him. One low-level Saiyan was as good as any other. His scout began beeping, giving a crazy reading. It started to spike madly before he turned his head, looking for whatever the hell it was. The signal calmed within seconds as Raditz looked about. It had started near 5,000, and only went up, before disappearing into nothing. He didn't trust that, not at all. Hello there, Raditz, was it? Raditz felt his blood go cold. That deep voice was somehow eerie. It thrummed with authority, and the fact it knew his name sent a chill down his spine. The figure that was now before Raditz stood there, conveniently covered by a cloak, though he could see his hands. They were green, and had claws, similar to the alien before. Eyes narrowed on the figure as he moved his hand up to the scouter, looking for a reading. 2. He didn't believe that for a moment. Where did this guy come from for starters? They were in the middle of a field. He didn't look like the weaklings on this planet either. How do you know my name, Green Man? Raditz responded gruffly, his sneer firmly embedded in his features. He could feel the self-confident smile appear across this creature's face. I know many things, Raditz. For instance, that you are going to die here, today. Die at the hands of that demon you ran into earlier, and your little brother. Raditz's eyes widened upon hearing the words. He was going to die. What foolishness, he could crush that green idiot like a bug. But there was an authority behind his words that had an element of truth to them, despite how skeptical Raditz was. And how do you know that? Raditz asked. Tell me now, or you'll die before I get a chance to. Raditz then added, a red orb beginning to glow in his right hand as he stood there, preparing to teach this scum a lesson. When the laughter started, Raditz decided he'd had enough playing around. This freak was laughing at him of all people. With the flick of his wrist, the bolt of red energy came free from his hand, being sent to incinerate this being. When it stopped in mid-air at the gesture of the creature's hand, Raditz stood there in shock, almost unable to form words. Miraculously, I appear to be alive. Raditz now began to understand his situation, his eyes locked onto this creature. For the briefest of moment, he could have sworn his scouter had a failure. It beeped rapidly, its readings went past 15,000, and before it could continue, it was back down to 2. Power level 15,000 or more. Raditz could barely stand there as he tried to grasp what he was dealing with. 15,000, that was more than most of Frieza's elites. What are you? The figure seemed to ponder for a moment, his smile only intensifying. You may call me the Catalyst, Raditz. You see, I need you hear this. I am not here to kill you. I am here to, in fact, encourage you. The tone was sinister. If anything, it sounded more reminiscent of Frieza. He clearly wanted something from him. Firstly, let me start by telling you that even if you win this coming battle, your foes will simply use the Dragon Balls to fix whatever damage you do. Cartoons. Dragon Balls. Mystical items that will allow he who possesses all 7 to summon a dragon, who will grant the bearer any wish. From reviving the dead, to eternal life or eternal youth. Raditz heard the words as his eyes glanced at the old creature. Eternal youth. Immortality. These certainly were concepts that he enjoyed the sound of. His eyes remained focused on this green freak, however, he could only think of these Dragon Balls so much with this creature here. His existence in life was certainly at jeopardy with a creature that had over 10 times his power level. Next, allow me to explain what is going to happen. You are going to lose. I won't describe how, I wouldn't want to spoil the surprise, he said confidently, before locking his eyes onto Raditz's scouter. With a red flash from his eyes, the device exploded, bits crumbling from Radtitz's face as the Saiyan stepped back, reaching his hand up to the scorch on the side of his head. Raditz clenched his fist and snarled. You have two choices. Either you and your brother can die, or your brother can die. Either will result in your defeat. If you wish to live another day, Raditz, you will do as I tell you. Kill Goku, and then escape. Raditz heard the words as he rolled his eyes, scoffing. And why are you doing this, Catalyst? I am sure it is for my benefit, of course. The sarcasm dripped from each word as the green-skinned figure narrowed his eyes on him. Hardly. Your benefit is a mere coincidence and little else. However, the Dragon Balls are useless if the green one dies. I am sure Vegeta and Nappa would want to hear about how you cost them their chance at eternal life by killing him. Raditz froze, looking at the hooded figure and grit his teeth. How did you know about Nappa and Vegeta? He then asked, the moment dawning on him. Behind him, two figures landed from the sky, their bodies braced for combat. Raditz had barely recognized their arrival. His head quickly turned back, to see that the hooded figure was gone. Gone? Where is my son? Goku demanded. The words drew Raditz back into reality. It was as if he'd been in a dream only seconds earlier. Ah, I don't see a pile of dead bodies, Kakarot, so I am going to assume that you didn't do the little job I asked of you. No, I didn't. Now where is Gohan? Piccolo stood next to him, his eyes cold as steel as well. The alien demon whatever was supposed to kill him. Impossible, his power level was barely above 300 when they first met. But that figure had known about Nappa and Vegeta, and he knew the scouter would have communicated about the Dragon Balls. Dragon Balls he must have intentionally mentioned to him. He even made sure to let him know the Namek couldn't be killed, or the balls would disappear. And if they disappeared, he'd die as a result of Nappa and Vegeta's fury. It dawned on him in that moment. He'd just been set up. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, 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 opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Goku was such a fool. Even now Piccolo could only think of how to not only destroy Raditz, but Goku as well. Piccolo knew full well, of course, the chief priority had to be the strongest of his adversaries. However, his day could only get better if Goku managed to get mortally wounded in all this. There was something different, however, about Raditz. He noted almost immediately that his scanning device seemed gone. He also had looked unprepared for their arrival. Something must have happened. Either way, it was fine by his standards. The kid is in my space pod. The brat wouldn't shut up. Are we going to do this already? Piccolo asked, tossing aside his weighted clothes. You wear weighted clothes too, Piccolo? There was no time to answer. Clearly Raditz had enough small talk as he started to power up. Both Goku and Piccolo felt the waves of force coming off the older Saiyan as Raditz almost snarled at the pair of them. You two are mine, Raditz shouted, his body blasted through the air towards the two. His image passed through them as they both attempted to block him, only to have him appear behind them, dropping his elbows into their backs. The two fighters bounced off their stomachs and flipped to their feet, turning to face Raditz. There was a pause in the fighting. Piccolo could feel Raditz appraising his next moves, and he knew Goku could feel the same. Within a second, the decisions by both sides had been made. It was clear Raditz had the initiative. The motions of the Saiyan's body blurred as he blasted first towards Piccolo, and then veered into Goku instead. The two aliens came to blows, Raditz clearly having the advantage as he drove Goku back. Each attack Goku launched was immediately countered by the faster elder. A fist was thrown in response by Goku. Finally, Raditz landed a kick on Goku's side, sending the younger brother flailing to the ground. Without his scouter, Raditz was finding keeping track of his opponents more difficult, as he soon found out even more once Piccolo's boot firmly planted itself on the side of his face. The world seemed to almost slow for a moment before the Saiyan warrior could even get his bearings back enough to address the Namek. By the time he recovered and turned his frame, Piccolo had already landed another punch on his face. With a furious snarl, Raditz launched his own back into the Namek. First dropping a knee into the abdomen of Piccolo, and drawing his own arms up to lay in an axe handle smash. Instead, he found two arms locked behind his own. Kakarot, he shouted, before Goku pulled him back and slammed him head first, upside down, into the earth. Raditz rolled back, barely recovering in time, breathing heavily as he looked at the other two laboring warriors. Without the ability to track their movements outside of his vision, he was finding the situation increasingly difficult. And they knew it. Goku, have you noticed what I have? Piccolo said quietly, looking briefly to his rival. Yay, he can't detect energy without that device he had earlier. Good. Keep him off balance and he's finished. They could see his teeth grit with frustration as well, it was showing. Do you two idiots really think you can keep this up? He finally said. Allow me to show you how wrong you are. Two energy orbs appeared in his hands, their white-blue energy rippling out of his hands as he powered the attack. The power spike was enough that both fighters opposite to Raditz prepared to dodge. When the beams blasted from Raditz's palms, they went flying straight towards Goku and Piccolo. In the blink of an eye, both fighters went skywards. Below them, the two beams shattered into the earth and released their energy. Two huge plumes of blue fire erupted below them, the brightness of the explosions nearly blinding them. Before Piccolo could react further, Raditz's elbow had found its mark, crashing into the side of his skull. The Namek's head slid unnaturally back as his body almost started to rocket to Earth, only to be accelerated from a vicious diving knee from Raditz into the top of his chest. The green combatant's form descended into the smoke towers before crashing into the craters below. By the time Goku noticed this, his head turned rapidly to see Raditz hovering in the air. He dove through the air towards him, feet first, locking his feet together. With a bone-shattering impact, he drove his feet into the back of his older brother. Raditz flipped in the air from the impact, instinctively drawing up his arms in defense as he turned to face Goku, blocking the fist his brother sought to follow up with. Now Goku found himself with a fist in his own face, warping the shape of his cheek from the power of the impact, before Goku too found himself descending towards the craters with a powerful kick from Raditz. When Goku struck the ground, his body hit the earth with a dull crash, and then flopping onto his back. Before he could even try to get up, a knee found its home in his abdomen, as Raditz had dived after him from above. The ground cracked around them before the eldest of the siblings pulled himself up, leaving Goku to cough. Piccolo had found his feet, and braced himself. Just buy me some time, Goku, he thought. Goku managed to grab Raditz's foot from his position on the ground, starting to pull himself up. The green man looks constipated, and you look half dead. What exactly are you going to achieve fighting me? Raditz scoffed. He kicked his brother over again, grabbing him by the hair and pulling him to his feet. The blows which landed next were sadistic, Brutal body shots and harsh blows to the head as Raditz laughed at the weakness of his opponents, before he turned to fire an energy blast into Piccolo, who was still standing there just as he'd been. What kind of strategy is that? Standing there like a fool. Here, let me help you, Namek. The red orb forming in his palms began to glow vibrantly, as the orange-blue electrical bolts began to be seen as visible on Piccolo's fingers. It was strange to see both Piccolo and Raditz looking confident. Saturday Crush. Masenko Sapo. When the wave from Raditz collided with Piccolo's beam, the two forces met with a shockwave, the deadly beam cannon grinding into the energy wave from Raditz. For his part, Raditz hadn't understood the full amount of power Piccolo had gathered. He hadn't understood concentrating that much power in one point to raise one's power level. Once the initial shock wave ended, Raditz could see the result. After only 2, perhaps 3 seconds, his own beam was being torn through, the beam cannon driving it back its helpless counterpart. Raditz panicked, his eyes filling with fear like a bottle of water under a tap. No way. When the beam hit Raditz, it had been much diminished from its original form. The Saturday Crush had dulled the attack. Furthermore, the beam collided with Raditz's gauntlets at the last moments as he urgently raised his defense. The gigantic blast that came out in shock waves a second later resulted in Goku being blasted aside, his body bleeding and burned, and Raditz disappearing in the heart of the explosion. Piccolo was left standing there, his body breathing in and out heavily from the exertion of his attack. "Let's see you walk away from that, you bastard," Piccolo breathed. When the smoke cleared, much of his armor destroyed and split off, Raditz fell to one knee, his arms bleeding and trembling. He looked utterly wrecked. He looked up at the demon, with clenched teeth as he tried to get up, before almost falling back. "You, Green Man, you are dead," he managed to utter hatefully as Piccolo suddenly smiled confidently. "Is that so? From here you are looking pretty rough." Evidently not rough enough, however, as Raditz managed to send a massive energy blast in Piccolo's direction. Piccolo's jaw dropped before he put up his defense. The explosion was nowhere near as impressive as the one just prior, but it was impressive enough to send the Namekian flying back covered in smoke, before he crashed to the grassy fields beyond. It was then that Goku faced towards Raditz, the two of them bleeding, torn, ruined. With a leap and a kick, Goku started the being blocked by his brother's knee only to find a strong fist bludgeoning his head within seconds. Blow after blow landing on him. Goku started to go limp, blood gushing from the wounds in his head and his mouth. Raditz stopped as he took a moment to breath. "Kakarot, give up," he breathed. Goku tried to stay conscious and just bobbed his head, looking at Raditz. "I can't," Goku responded. With frustration, Raditz raised his hand to strike again. Then the space pod exploded. "What the hell is it with this planet?" Raditz uttered, only to find his nephew standing there. "Leave my dad alone," Gohan shouted. "The kid?" Raditz asked, in shock. "The kid blew up my pod." Gohan then gave an inaudible cry, before launching at Raditz with a golden red flame around him. Raditz just stared in shock, before the impact. His ribs broke, at least 3 instantly, before he was sent rolling back. His body lay flat on its back as he moved his burned and bloodied hand to hold his midsection. He was too injured, too torn up. Finally Raditz managed to bring himself to his feet, seeing Piccolo had returned. Goku had barely managed to get to his knees, and was struggling as he looked at him to get to his feet. "It's unfortunate for you, Raditz. But you are done," Piccolo chuckled, crossing his arms. He could feel Raditz's power lowered enough now that he was susceptible to their attacks, if Goku could attack. It didn't matter much, given that he, Piccolo, was in good fighting order still. An aircraft passed overhead, containing Goku's friends just as Piccolo smiled darkly. Raditz realized he needed an out. His scouter, armor, and spacecraft were all out of commission. Goku was badly injured and he was sure the green alien's power had to be drained. Physical injury now nagged him. Without his ship or scouter he couldn't communicate either, he was stranded on this rock. Before he could think further, Goku stepped towards him, one hand readied for battle, the other hanging limply at his side. It's over, Raditz, surrender. Goku urged. Never. Raditz responded, his eyes looking at Goku then back to Piccolo. Piccolo just started to chuckle as energy began forming in his hands. Another blast. He then saw the two fingers form for that damn drill again. He was too injured to dodge it again. He stepped towards Goku, keeping his eye on Piccolo. When Piccolo had the attack charged again, Raditz smiled. Finish me off then. Do it, cowards, he shouted. Piccolo took the bait. Masenko Sapo. It was then that Raditz grabbed Goku, using all his strength to pull him in front, while diving to the ground. It was a mess. Kakarot was blasted through the abdomen by the green fool. When his body hit the ground, Raditz pulled himself up, grinning at the attacker. Only to find Piccolo grinning back. Either target works for me, Piccolo said, preparing to make his next. Only to find Krillin having jumped from the aircraft, rushing to Goku's side. Goku. The distraction was enough that Raditz had already mustered the last of his strength, flying skyward. This isn't over, Green Man. He shouted down towards him. I will ruin this world, and when my comrades arrive we will crush you all. He laughed, though his voice was strained. He was still faster in the air. Get back here, Piccolo shouted, before Raditz blasted off, using up the remains of his power. He looked towards Krillin, Gohan, and the dying Goku. Without saying so much as a word, he walked over, grabbing Gohan. The kid had been stronger than Raditz, he would need that. I would recommend training Krillin. Krillin just looked up. You monster, you killed Goku. It's alright, Krillin. Piccolo, please, stop him. You have to, or you'll die. 2. Piccolo just gave a small humph to Goku in response. We'll see. With that, he stole Goku's son, just as Goku died. He stole Goku's son, just as Bulma and Master Roshi arrived. Gohan's wails were heard briefly, before being silenced by distance, and likely Piccolo's temper. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Stuck out here. These were the thoughts running through Raditz's mind as he started to drag in the air, running out of energy, his body savaged and wounded. No communications, no refits, no healing tanks. It would take a year for Vegeta and Nappa to arrive. This had ended as a total catastrophe. He'd killed Kakarot, been manipulated by an old, hooded green man, and gotten the hell kicked out of him. Still, he'd be stronger for it. And if he could learn the secret of the Dragon Balls, perhaps he could still gain Vegeta's favor. He just needed time to heal. His ribs were broken, his arms were ruins of blood and burns. Raditz knew without a regeneration tank, this would take time. Vegeta sat in his pod, replaying what had been said to Raditz again. Nappa heard the same from his pod, the two rocketing through space. Just think what we can do with eternal life, Nappa. We could fight anybody, Nappa said with a broad grin. Yes, we could, even Frieza. Nappa blinked, before he realized the scheme's full scope. Yay, it'll be great. We'll get to crush that smug bastard and all of his cronies, and then you can rule the universe. Nappa said, before laughing. Vegeta enjoyed the prospect of it, ruling the universe through strength and power, and of course, through his coming eternal life. Revenge would be his against Frieza to start with. His rule over the universe would be eternal. Even if a warrior emerged who was stronger, he could simply fight them until he developed the upper hand in power, or circumstance. A smug smile appeared across his lips. What about Raditz? Nappa finally asked. What about Raditz? His scouter went dark, and then his pod went terminal. In all likelihood he was killed by Kakarot, or that alien fool he found before that. Their records are clearly in the scouter. But they only had power levels around 300 Vegeta, maybe that blip of 15,000 wasn't. Maybe what? Raditz was incompetent and was defeated. He was a low level anyway, he never could play in the big leagues like us Nappa. Vegeta said with a smirk. Well, what if Raditz is around when we get there? Nappa then asked. Then he'd better have gathered those Dragon Balls and killed everyone who would resist us. Earth is hardly a challenge and a waste of our time. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. The wounds were extensive, burns and broken bones being the most prominent. Even as a Saiyan warrior these took time to heal, too much time. For several months he lay low. After his battle against Piccolo and Goku, along with his retreat, Raditz was frankly in no position to push any agenda. He could hardly conquer the world in his current state, he could hardly find any of the mysterious Dragon Balls either. Instead, he'd gone to find shelter. He found some human hovel in the middle of nowhere, a village of perhaps 30 or 40. They'd been easy enough to dispose of. It was pathetic. They had no warrior spirit inside of them, nor did they have anything of any real value beyond the shelter. So he killed them, a few strikes, a few blasts, but it was a foregone conclusion. Thankfully he'd not damaged much in terms of the buildings. Unfortunately it only took a few weeks to run out of their edible, yet terrible food, and he'd soon be forced to find a new hovel to make his brief home in. Even now however, his ribs felt as though they were almost completely healed. He'd not heard from the mysterious green skin, hooded figure again. There was no way he imagined it, his scouter being destroyed before his confrontation with his brother and the alien, Piccolo. He almost expected him to come out from every corner even, given his appearance and disappearance. A grand plan apparently, to which he was to be involved in somehow. The others would come without a doubt, they would be too tempted by the Dragon Balls, then he'd see how tough the catalyst was, given Vegeta would easily outclass him if he showed up again. There was something familiar in the distance he realized a moment later, the rattling of weapons fire. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. With speed and precision, another blow came within a quarter of a millimeter of making contact with green flesh. Piccolo dodged another from his copy as he continued fighting aggressively against his copy. Block, block, strike, strike, block, blast, block, strike. The rhythm was almost endless as the two figures locked into battle. Each attack leading to another vicious attack, going as full out as they could. He had to get stronger. He needed to be strong enough not to just defeat Raditz, but defeat the two others on their way. It would be wise to first hunt down and destroy Raditz, but he had to be ready. Raditz's power was still on the planet, and it had grown from where it had been in their battle. In essence, they were all helpless to stop him until they gained enough power, and Piccolo knew full well he could achieve that power, and soon with his training regiment. The kid was still in the wilds, and he'd have to check up on him soon. However, pain exploded in his left cheek as his double landed a shot on his head while he'd been thinking of things other than training, and it served him right. Getting sloppy? The double asked with a devilish grin, to which Piccolo just smirked, before launching back into his, and within seconds, and roundly smashed his copy down towards the hills which he fought over, breaking his opponent through the soil and into thick clay, as the world seemed to crater around him. I'm not sure, you tell me. Piccolo shot back with a grin as the double seemed to scowl almost for a moment as the ground beneath him began to rumble with the gathering of energy from the world around him. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Another flash of automatic weapons fire rattled through the side of the pickup truck as the vehicle steered violently away from its counterpart, a rusted-out old bus which appeared to have an anti-aircraft gun mounted to it. In the truck, cold blue eyes followed the bus from the bed of the truck. The firm grip of the hand holding the weapon steadied its aim, before the figure launched its next volley of fire back into the bus. The first two bursts through the glass shielding around the old war gun. The rounds riddled through the occupant, two bullets puncturing the chest as wet bloody weeping wounds burst through his body and gushed into his clothes. He slumped forward dead in the chair as the gun tilted down, firing its heavy bore rounds down through road as the guns fired without control. Two bangs hit the top of the cab of the truck. Get us closer, the purple-haired figure demanded. And you. The shout came to the passenger. Get ready to jump. Within the bus, panic was erupting amongst its 6 passengers. All of them had the look of worn soldiers, people who'd seen too much fighting, but there was an element of fear there now. They keep coming. What the hell are we supposed to do? Protect the cargo. The boss will kill us if we lost it. He's spent too much time gathering the other two. We lose this one or the money and he'll kill us himself. The truck revved as it veered into them, hitting the side of the bus as the two vehicles drove now off-road, driving through the backside of the open field and light brush. Twigs and tree branches snapped against metal bumpers. The two lumbering wheeled vehicles bumped up and down widely as their suspensions were put under further stress. You're going to jump first, right? The passenger, the crony, asked his boss. They had no time for this attitude. Grabbing him with their gloved hand, the passenger was shoved forward and thrown towards the bus itself, as the boss jumped towards the rear of the bus. AHHGH. Bullets blasted out of the side of the bus from within as they tore through the helpless man, making his jump towards the bus, leaving his purple-haired counterpart to slip in through the back window. With a submachine gun in their hands, 2 bursts riddled through the back guard, blood spewing from his front as bits of clothes tore away along with flesh. The bloody heap fell to the ground before a knife went swiftly through the air, plunging into the neck of another guard, and then pistol rounds entered the skulls of 2 others, sending pink-red brain matter scattering all over the insides and windows of the modified bus. The last of the guards charged, drawing his combat knife. He found a knee in his gut. He hunched over the camouflaged pants which the knee was contained in. The heavy gloved fist drove into the side of his head, slamming his head into the side of the bus, before the other hand came about, twisting violently and snapping the neck. "Some people really need to learn to stay out of my way," came the irritated remark, as the body slid helplessly to the floor of the bus. The drive was all that remained. The bus stopped finally as he realized his comrades were dead. Slowly the camouflage-wearing man stood up, noting his attacker for a moment as he froze with fear, raising his hands. "You win. You can have the Dragon Ball, take the money too," he begged. They were already in the possession of attacker, however, callous uncaring eyes set on driver, simply drawing the pistol and firing. The front window of the bus had yet another bullet hole placed through it, but was uncomfortably decorated with yet more pink and red ooze. Stepping over the downed body, the figure looked at the pickup truck as the driver got out. "Damn Violet," the driver said loudly, walking to the former Red Ribbon Army colonel. "We're gonna be rich. Those guys went down like nothing. And think how much we're gonna get from the boss for that Dragon Ball," he said with jubilation, noting the 3-star Dragon Ball. Cold eyes analyzed the buffoon who'd driven her truck. She gave a half sneer of disgust. I mean I get my cut too, right? I put my neck out here too, Violet. I don't like sharing," she said simply, drawing her pistol at point-blank range and firing a round between his eyes. His body stood there for almost a second, that seemed like an eternity before collapsing forward, blood pooling around his head. Without much ceremony she stepped over the legs of the body. Despite having stolen almost all the money from the Red Ribbon Army, just as that kid Goku brought everything crashing down, Colonel, Violet found herself always in need of more money. She hated it deeply, because no matter how much she managed to earn or steal, it always disappeared. It disappeared into houses, luxuries, everything anyone could ever want. That entire safe she'd stolen from yielded her 2 years of terrible decisions. Then it went back to the trade. She stole what others needed stolen, she killed who others needed killed, and it just fueled the endless cycle of boom and bust for her. But after so long she was starting to get tired of it, but no matter how tired she got, the cycle never ended. This job was going to bring in another 20 million zenny. People paid mad money for Dragon Balls. She stopped at the pickup, as if realizing something had changed just as she'd shot Milton, her driver. The front of the truck was utterly destroyed. Not just that, the engine had literally been torn out of it. "So," a new voice said, her eyes widening slightly before narrowing towards where she thought she heard it coming from. "That's what a Dragon Ball looks like. It's the same as that brat kid had back on that island." Violet was finally able to make out the source of the noise. "He was big. Who the hell are you?" she demanded, carefully pulling the Dragon Ball back behind her, only slightly. The money was valuable, but that Dragon Ball was worth far more. It took her months to track it down, and these idiots she stole it from had found it only a few minutes before she had. He didn't answer as he started to walk towards her, a devilish grin on his face. "Some people can't learn from others, I guess," she said simply, raising his pistol and firing a shot directed at Raditz's head. Faster than her eyes could follow, his hand caught the bullet. You Earthlings are so dependent on these weapons. It's so primitive, he mocked, opening his hand to reveal the bullet. To Violet, watching a man catch a bullet out of mid-air was not an everyday occurrence, however at the same time it was not something completely unseen. She'd seen video of men doing this from back in her time in the Red Ribbon Army. No one was invincible, she reminded herself, attempting to hide the look of mild shock on her face. Then the words he was saying hit her, Earthlings. He didn't look like an alien at all, or rather he didn't look so different. She thought he was a tail. A tail. Just like that crazy kid who destroyed most of Commander Red's army, took out mercenary Dow. The situation was slowly coming to her attention. This big beast was the same as that kid. He then disappeared from where he was, appearing in front of her. Her eyes traced up to him as he continued to smirk like the devil down at her. I appreciate your ruthless attitude. Just for that, if you hand over the Dragon Ball, I may let you live. He'd watched most of the chase from the moment he heard the gunfire. He saw and heard everything relevant in his view. Use the weaker, inferior lackeys ruthlessly. No wasting time when dealing with her adversaries, and making sure there were no loose ends. In fact, she'd have already been on her way if he hadn't noticed the Dragon Ball. He could see the uncertainty and fear coming from her now, however, clearly a sign she wasn't stupid. Her face switched to one of complete seriousness, however. He saw her draw up the gun again to fire, this time obviously at point-blank range. Perhaps she was far dumber than he thought. He grabbed her pistol effortlessly, looking down at her with revulsion. He saw her hands come up, grabbing his, as if trying to pull the gun out of his grip. She never saw the backhand coming a moment later, sending her rolling back and laying limply on the ground. It was then that Raditz noticed something, a small device on his thumb. He crushed the pistol in his hand before plucking the small puck-shaped object up, looking at it. He then noticed her stared at him, pulling up a small trigger device. Then the world got brighter and hotter. Violet watched the explosion and raised her arms to shield her face. She felt the heat coming from the blast. The shock wave was still enough to cause her to slide back against the dirt and grass below her. She smiled to herself as she barely managed to rise on weak legs. He'd hit her hard enough that she honestly thought she would die. Her whole body felt like it had been in a car accident. The remains of the truck were now smoldering with the flames of the explosion, and she knew damn well her last capsules were in the cab, but the freak had been dealt W. There was a figure in the smoke. Her body froze in terror as the figure stood there, completely unscathed. That wasn't very nice, he said, sounding utterly amused. Not a single mark on his entire body, not a mark even on his hand where the explosive had gone off. With blurring speed, Raditz appeared in front of her again, this time his hand grabbing for her neck and hoisting her into the air effortlessly. Instead of holding the Dragon Ball, she dropped it, her hands going to his hand trying to keep her head up, all the same she was choking. With lightning speed, Raditz caught the Dragon Ball with his free hand, examining it closely. He noticed the 3 stars within the sphere itself. Now then, let's see where we are going to begin, woman. Raditz said, his amusement still showing through into his voice. How did you find this Dragon Ball? Hair UCNTBRTH. She barely managed, his grip even tightening for a moment as his smile turned more sadistic. When he was satisfied he'd made his point, he finally let her go, dropping her to the ground. Speak, came the immediate order. Of course, Violet held her neck, coughing several times before looking up at him, still trying to gain her breathing deeply several times, replenishing the air in her lungs. Bruises already began forming around where he'd grabbed her, each finger enough to cause serious damage. I tracked it using a dragon radar. She finally admitted. A dragon radar. It shows where the Dragon Balls are. came the exhausted response. Carefully, she drew the radar from her back pocket, placing it on the ground next to her. It's yours, she promised. Violet knew her odds of survival at this point played entirely on her ability to keep this maniac satisfied with her concessions, even if it was only a small chance. Raditz just seemed entertained by her near plead for life. He raised his hand, a glowing ball of energy forming. Having seen this a dozen times before, Violet had turned away and she closed her eyes. She attempted not to tremble, however some of it did show through. It wasn't violence or death that bothered her, but the idea of her own death. You, woman, are lucky, Raditz said, his voice filled with a false cheer. She felt the heat from the energy orb dissipating and realized he wasn't about to annihilate her. A vicious grab came to her arm, forcing her to her feet before shoving her back against a smaller tree. She grabbed it for support as her eyes locked onto Raditz, not willing to let them move anywhere else now. He didn't say why, and the last thing she noted was his tail swishing around several times, before it came by and slapped her upside the head so hard she felt her world spin into unconsciousness. Dark eyes stared ahead as the one-minded resolve of Goku drove him forward. He had to get to King Kai's planet, and quick. Each step seemed to only carry more momentum as he seemingly flew across the top of the Great Road. It had only been a few hundred miles back that he'd left Princess Snake, tied up, and that seemed more than appropriate. Now his thoughts drifted to the Earth, however, to Gohan and the others. He had to train, not just to defeat the new threats of Raditz's comrades, but also Raditz himself. In the year while he was gone, the only power left on the Earth who could even remotely challenge him was Piccolo. Still, he was completely in the dark until he got a means of communicating with Kami, or anyone really, again. There was almost a buzz, and something made him almost freeze. On the road he could almost feel eyes on him. There was no one nearby at all, however. He stopped completely, closing his eyes in concentration. Any power nearby, he felt for it. He reached out and almost tried to grab it with his mind. There was someone out there. It was trying to hide, very well, but he could feel it almost at the edge of his mind, feeling their intentions. A familiar smile stretched across Goku's face as he looked ahead. I know you are out there, he said finally. There was a calm amongst the yellow clouds around them as several blurs motioned all around him. Still, Goku remained motionless. In front of him a second later a large hooded figure appeared. It was a familiar source of energy, but he couldn't quite place his finger on it. He examined him closely, looking for some giveaway, some symbol. He then felt an almost sharp pain in his mind. Grabbing his head, Goku fell to one knee. You, a voice whispered in his mind. I shouldn't be surprised you felt me. I was just checking up on you. You will have the misfortune of surviving this encounter, and perhaps surviving others. But let me make this very clear to you, I will kill you, Goku. I will kill your bastard child, and I will kill everyone who cares about you. The pieces merely need to fall in place. You aren't allowed to be annihilated from this existence yet. Despite the pain Goku suffered through, his eyes turning upwards as he slowly rose from one knee, glaring at the hooded figure. I'm not afraid of you, he declared, and leave my friends and family out of this. If you have a grudge against someone, let it be only against me. No, Goku, I don't believe I can. The figure disappeared, zipping into speeds Goku couldn't follow as he scanned around Snake's way briefly, looking for him. There was a final, terrible whisper in his mind. Don't worry, Goku. Our glorious confrontation and my revenge are reserved for later. Go to the pitiful King Kai's world, train, grow stronger. It will make it all the more satisfying when I crush you, after the Saiyans have done most of my work for me. We'll see, Goku said in response, before giving a half smile, showing his undying confidence. With that, Goku's legs began to sprint again, breaking for it as fast as he could to the end of the Snake's way. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Hey wow, what a cool little planet, Goku declared, hovering above the world of King Kai, the world he'd finally come to find. Suddenly, he felt the gravity beginning to overwhelm him. Oh! With that, Goku fell painfully towards King Kai's world, landing face first, just as a monkey named Bubbles hopped over to see the commotion. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Violet slowly came to. Her eyes felt pained as she tried to focus. The ground was hard, made of concrete, that much she could tell. It was then she slowly came alive to the world, hearing the sounds of screams, gunshots echoing followed by more screams. The city she awakened to was a ruin, buildings destroyed and burned down, tanks and military vehicles littering the streets like broken toys discarded by an angry child. Finally, the last scream ceased when the next explosion was heard. She knew it had to be him, the monster she'd faced in the Outlands. Careful, her arms still badly bruised, she started to rise. A corpse landed in front of her from above, its head twisted on backwards and save for a pair of underpants. She barely noticed it, instead, instinctively looking up from where it had fallen. There he was, hanging in the air, now clad in the man's military uniform. At least he finally got some more clothes on. When he landed in front of her, Violet stepped back, pressing against the wall. Where are we? Some rotten hole apparently called South City. It's more South Ruin now. Raditz scoffed, before dropping a Dragon Ball in front of Violet. You will be holding onto these for me, he declared simply. Her eyes now scrutinized him seriously. Carefully, she grasped the Dragon Ball, only to find his foot over it, and her hand. She looked up at the very dark appearance on his face, his eyes staring down at her. With his mouth formed into a serious frown, he very bluntly said, "You are only alive because you are the most entertaining human I have discovered so far. But make no mistake, if you cross me you will die very, very quickly." Raditz said with sinister intention. Violet swallowed hard, before nodding. What are you? She finally asked. I am a Saiyan warrior from the planet Vegeta. My name is Raditz. It didn't seem possible, but the city around them was evidence, as was that brat kid Goku from before. These creatures were clearly unnaturally powerful. However, if he was sparring her, she obviously could potentially gain some favor. A small, hesitant, yet confident smile appeared across her lips. You know, a being of your power could easily become ruler of the entire earth. Not only was sucking up to a godlike being a good idea, but proposing more power couldn't hurt either. Oh, Raditz responded, feigning interest. Yes, she said, becoming more enthusiastic, if only mildly. Maybe I could help. Think about it. You are the strongest being on the planet, probably even stronger than King Piccolo or Son Goku. You could have this whole planet in the palm of your hand. And how exactly would you help me, woman? Violet smiled, though subtly. I know my way around. But you'd need someone to help keep the people in line, you can't be everywhere. I've got enough connections that I could get an army together pretty quickly, and you'd need enforcers. To be blunt, she saw the winds change, just like with the Red Ribbon Army. There was no need to Earth-centric patriotism, this was as good as it was going to get, being an enforcer for the new order. Finally, Raditz started to laugh. Oh, and how would you enforce a population of one? He laughed. She paused, realizing what had just been said a moment later, her eyes wide. You're going to kill everyone. She managed to say. Very observant. There was a nervous swallow on her part. What about me? Why haven't you killed me yet? She finally asked. Raditz grinned. There it was, the attitude he'd found so endearing earlier. Survival first. Prosperity first, let the others die if need be so long as you survive to live another day and get an advantage. There had been so many pitiful heroes around here, all willing to die for a lost cause or for glory, but this one was different. She just plainly wasn't willing to die, and would sell out her own people to survive and prosper. Do you know how insignificant this world is? Raditz finally asked. If it weren't for the Dragon Balls, I'd have already cleared half of these pitiful weaklings away by now. This world will get sold to the highest bidder, after we get our wish. Violet finally asked. My lord, Prince Vegeta, and my commanding officer, Nappa are coming to Earth as we speak, only a few more weeks until they arrive. They are significantly more powerful than I am. When they do, I will be waiting here with the Dragon Balls. Then we will ask the dragon for immortality. Raditz said, smiling arrogantly. Why wait? She asked. Raditz blinked, looking down at the human, who was now smiling arrogantly herself. What if we were to wish for immortality? You could be the one in charge. Even if they are stronger, who cares? You'll be immortal. Of course, she had her own agenda, namely surviving this purge of the planet. It didn't matter to her largely if the rest of humanity was annihilated, so long as she got out of the situation with her skin intact, and looking better than she was before. Raditz noted the cunning smile on this arrogant human. And you, woman, would be immortal as well, I presume? He asked, smirking to match hers. She felt a thrill as he responded. He was talking about other worlds and planetary conquest, for the sake of money and power. But think of the money and power she could obtain working for him, especially if she were immortal. No more 2-bit jobs working to steal a Dragon Ball, or kill some warlord on the fringes of the world. Space technology would have been hyper-advanced as well. She could buy almost anything she wanted whenever she wanted, with little to no risk of depletion of resources. What is your name, woman? Violet, sir. She responded, giving a salute, smile still on her face. Her own enthusiasm disappeared, however, as his did, his face twisted into an angry sneer. She felt herself swallow nervously before he stepped towards her. Well, Violet, he said very calmly, it would be very foolish for me to wish for eternal life on my own. You see, Vegeta is insurmountably more powerful than I am. Even if I were immortal, he could toss me into a star, a place, eternal or not, I could never escape. I would be a complete fool to challenge him. Then there is the added fact that I am loyal to Prince Vegeta. He said, reaching out and grasping her neck again. She made a struggled gasp for breath as he smirked at her. And you see, you will be lucky enough to survive this purge so far. If I were you, I'd just be grateful for the extra time you've managed to find. Violet felt her heart racing as he let go. Thankfully, He hadn't grasped so hard as to nearly crush her neck as last time. Clearly, he was unimpressed by her plan. Still, she was going to find a way to survive this, perhaps even find a way to use the Dragon Balls to her own advantage. Rule number 1, survival. After that she could worry about anything else. She noted Raditz pull up the dragon radar. Only 3 other groups left. Others have been collecting these, excellent. He said with an amused tone. Doing all the work for me. Violet felt him grab her by the arm, preparing to take off. Wait, she cried, desperately holding the dragon balls with her other arm, before they ascended into the air, her legs kicking out desperately as the two flew through the air. Raditz held on tightly, making sure she wouldn't fall, of course. There was a nagging feeling in his mind to not bother with her at all, but something drove him to keep her there, as if finding the excuse. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Piston City. Several days later. Fires roared throughout the city as buildings burned. Piston City had been known as the industrial heartland of much of the production that the Capsule Corporation was responsible for. The huge facilities that produced structures and vehicles burned violently. Huge black clouds billowed into the sky, making it look almost like some kind of hell on earth. The city of nearly 2 million had become in and of itself a war zone. On the streets it was absolute chaos. Tanks rolled down the main roads backed by infantry, burning wrecks of attack helicopters and jets scattered the streets, or their remnants remained embedded in the sides of buildings, which were set ablaze by the fail of the aircraft now inside of them. In the midst of this madness and destruction, Raditz laughed with a kind of sinister joy only one who'd burned worlds could. Each pathetic attempt the humans had made to harm him was easily deflected. Even now, as a new set of 4 tanks moved up to him, he stood his ground in the middle of the street, just smirking at them as they moved into place. Monster, we demand that you surrender yourself now. A loudspeaker ordered. They'd not tried to communicate with him for hours until now. He was guessing their new tactic was born of desperation, which he was fine with. To his left, Violet stared at the tanks dully. When she'd first gotten here it had been much more hard racing, until she found Raditz could catch tank shells out of midair, and destroy the offending tank with them. Also, he could pull the turrets off, or even blast them. Aren't we here for a Dragon Ball? Violet asked, her voice sounding bored more than anything. Of course, however, I'd not been entertained for days, and these pathetic fools are offering me at least a few moments of entertainment. Raditz explained. We've been here for 2 hours. Violet responded, sounding annoyed. Raditz gave an annoyed growl in response, glaring at her. Remember your place, woman. We go where I want, when I want. And if I want to destroy this city and kill everyone in it, you'll do best to remember who is in charge. Raditz said darkly. Whatever. Violet finally said, turning and walking away from the tanks and Raditz towards the sidewalk. What? Where are you going? Raditz snapped angrily. Relax. I'm going to go find something to eat. Things had become so casual, which in many ways made Violet feel, even if it was only a tiny feeling on the inside, like an even worse traitor. She inevitably betrayed everyone she'd ever worked with. As of right now, for the first time in her life, she realized she couldn't betray Raditz. He was the first creature she'd been either forced or voluntarily aligned with who could and would slaughter her for her normal behavior. There was a sense of fear following her as never before. But the casualness she was beginning to feel was an admission of the circumstance. She would use him as much as she could, but inevitably, he was her ticket to survival. The Saiyans would come regardless, his masters Vegeta and Nappa would come to Earth, and they would kill everyone. The best she could hope for was to be spared. No large-scale human group could be spared, even if there were other collaborators. She'd do whatever she had to. She would survive. Raditz looked angry behind her, which gave her a small smile. Woman, you get back here right now. A tank shell exploded just as he'd stopped paying attention to her. That'll keep him busy for a while at least. Violet thought with a snicker, before entering a relatively undamaged glass office building. Walking over to the elevator, she found the floor listing for the cafeteria. Her satchel with the dragon balls over her shoulder, she simply walked into the elevator and headed for the 10th floor. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. It took about another 20 minutes to add 14 tanks to the burning hulks of wrecked vehicles, dozens of rocket artillery pieces, and hundreds of soldiers. Raditz was disappointed with his own progress, firing blasts into the formations, before noting soldiers were now moving into and around the buildings, attempting to use them as cover. He sneered and blasted them away. Briefly, while under fire only from small arms, he checked the dragon radar. The ball was close, very close, and moving. He felt annoyed as he hovered. He'd collect the woman soon enough, then collect the ball, and then finish this miserable city. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Sergeant Pine marched up the stairs of the building at a fast rate, moving along with his 10 elite soldiers towards the 10th floor. Reports had come in that the aliens' ally had been spotted moving into this building. They'd just swept the first 9 floors and were making good progress. They'd already managed to profile her. Was that monster outside part of the old Red Ribbon Army? The reason it was being asked about was because it turned out his ally was none other than the notorious Colonel Violet. She was almost the textbook definition of a moral war criminal if there ever was one. Villages burned, murders, terrorist attacks, armed robberies, and frequently known to kill her own allies. Sometimes she'd received the nickname the Violet Widow. When they made it to the 10th floor, abandoned cafeteria tables were seen, scattered about by the fleeing staff once the explosions had started outside. There was another massive bang outside as the beast out there slaughtered the army. However, They could only deal with one threat at a time, at least right now. Colonel Violet was sitting there, casually eating soup. She seemed perfectly calm as the broth was quietly eaten by her. She looked, if anything, remarkably bored and uninterested. Pine and two of his men approached, their guns out, trained on her. As they directly approached her, she just looked up at them briefly. Her short cropped purple hair stood out as her blue eyes made direct eye contact with Pine. She moved her head to one side for a moment, before casually beginning to eat her soup again. "I am Sergeant Pine of the Central Royal Army." Violet didn't respond. He felt frustrated, gripping his weapon angrily. The grip on his automatic rifle felt rough against his fingers, before he stepped forward, shoving the rifle towards Violet. "How do we stop that monster out there?" "You don't," she said quietly, before gently blowing on the soup, sipping at the broth again. Pine blinked. Just who the hell did she think she was? "What is in the pouch?" he demanded, pointing his rifle at the satchel. Violet sighed, looking bored, before looking into Pine's eyes. "I make it a rule to avoid talking to dead men. This is really inconvenient, do you mind?" Pine blinked. His two guards stood there entirely without words for what she'd just said. She was there, casually drinking the remains of her soup, while they had guns point at her. As if she had no concern whatsoever. Colonel Violet was a renowned fugitive, but there was no way she could take them all on, especially while she was sitting there drinking soup in an abandoned cafeteria. Especially when she was immediately outnumbered 3-1, and really outnumbered 10-1. He was mad enough that he finally knocked her bowl away, the last bits of broth splashing against the table before the bowl fell from the table, cracking on the floor from the impact. Violet looked at the bowl for a moment. Carefully she took off the satchel. If anything happened to the Dragon Balls, she'd be dead very quickly. She sighed, preparing to stand up, hearing a click as she did. "Don't move a muscle," Pine ordered. "You are now in the custody of the Royal Earth Army. You are going to be taken to justice. And that monster you and the Red Ribbon Army out there has unleashed is going to be stopped." Violet finally smiled. "He's much worse than the Red Ribbon Army. And he'd kill you all." Violet's hands were on the table, keeping her body level with it before looking up, looking Pine in the eyes. "If I wasn't going to first." With that she slid under the table in one quick motion, sliding under it directly into Pine. Her hands grabbed his rifle as he let a burst of fire go. She gambled his own men wouldn't fire at this Ranger Angel, risking killing him. The two stood there locked in struggle, but only for a few moments. Pine felt his own arms starting to buckle as he looked at Violet. Her frame at the table had been calmed, not flexed or tense. She had appeared in shape, but this was something completely different. It felt like he was wrestling a 120-pound wolf. Well-muscled, seasoned arms finally managed to flip his rifle away from him. As soon as it was free from his hands, Pine grabbed his knife's hilt. Before the combat knife could even be drawn, she'd grabbed his other hand, dragging him towards her before pulling the arm in front of her, breaking two of his fingers in the process. She arched his arm back and pulled his whole frame over her, before snapping his arm on her shoulder. Within seconds, Violet flipped him around, grabbing his pistol and holding him hostage. Pine's breathing was heavily labored, mixed with fury and agony as he tried to cope with his badly broken arm. His soldiers hesitated to kill them both, it was their loss. She always knew when to gamble with these weaklings. "Put him down," one of the men shouted, pulling up his rifle as if he intended to shoot. Her sinister smile was still on her face. Violet drew his pistol from his holster, before slipping it into the back of her pants. Pine's weathered features began to almost snarl. "There is no out for you now," he told her. "I told you, I don't bother talking to dead men," she repeated, sounding irritated for having to repeat herself. With her now free hand, she grabbed the ammo belt which was hanging around the front of his torso, tightening her lock on his other arm. "Shoot her," Pine ordered. His men still hesitated. She managed to slip her fingers through 4 grenade pins on his torso. His eyes widened as she did. Suddenly and quickly she pulled the pins out. Snapping his other arm, he stumbled forward, his eyes wide as he tried to find words. Suddenly pain exploded in his back. Both of Violet's feet kicking him at once, the force so strong it sent him flying across the room towards 3 of his comrades. The gunfire started as Violet raced to take cover behind a table, which she flipped even as the rounds came in. "Run!" Pine shouted to his men as one knelt down to help him up. With the sound of thunder going off a moment later, red ruin splattered against 2 walls. Not much remained of Sergeant Pine, his body blasted to bits. His 3 men were a different story. The man kneeling to him's arm was blown off and out a window, becoming human shrapnel. His torso was rent into a sack of torn meat, and his head was half blown off. His innards and blood stained the floor around him. The other 2 were just as fortunate, one suffering from both his legs being blasted off, and fragments tearing through his body. The other lost his left arm, and had puncture wounds burst from his neck, blood pumping directly out of his body as it happened. Immediately the fire alarms went off, one of the grenades turning out to be an incendiary grenade. The flames found their home in the tables near the other soldiers, who had been stunned by the blast and fragments of their friends bouncing around the room. The fire alarm went off and the water sprinklers came alive. Cold water began raining down from the ceiling, obscuring vision, getting their guns themselves wet, and making the entire environment more slippery. The lead soldier, the one who had originally approached Violet along with Pine, was finally beginning to get his bearings. He wiped his combat goggles clean of water. As soon as his hand was away, the purple-haired criminal was upon him. She'd gotten a running start through the water, slamming her knee into his gut. He coughed as the blow's impact caused him to lurch. Violet drew Pine's stolen pistol, pointing it towards the other soldier. The chamber ejected the hot casing from the side of the weapon as the round found its home inside the man's nose. The entire structure of cartilage imploded as the bullet pierced through the weaker flesh and into the brain. His head jerked back and down before the Royal Army soldier dropped. In front of her she heard the knife drawn from the other soldier. The man lunged at her violently, almost snarling as he did. He was completely overwhelmed by rage at the loss of his friends. Sidestepping the attack, Violet kicked his left leg into his right with such force that both feet were knocked out from under him. The soldier in his full combat gear slammed face first into a chair and the ground. Violet walked over, grasping the knife he'd dropped on his fall. When she looked to her left, she saw one soldier taking aim. Without a second thought she launched the knife from her downed adversary. The blade flipped through the air before finding its hope in the man's throat. Blood spurted from the wound almost immediately, sending blood nearly a foot in the air. The rifle went off several times as his body failed, shock setting in. 6 down, 4 to go. Moving from cover to cover, Violet slipped past another soldier as he rushed to check on his downed comrade. "Ah!" The lead soldier groaned. His face ached with pain from hitting the chair head first. "Sir, are you all right?" Another 2 soldiers rushed over, having finally reconstituted the remains of their unit, running through the remains of Sergeant Pine and the others. Violet knew it was her time to strike. Slipping in under the first one, she drew the pistol again, firing 3 rounds into the large glass window behind them. Running at top speed after this, grabbing a chair and throwing it in front of her, the guards scattered. The chair hit the damaged window, shattering it. She didn't slow down on her approach to the open sky, instead grabbing one guard once he recovered from moving aside from the chair, shoving him with all her momentum and speed. He sailed past where the window once was. His screams of shock and terror were evident as he began his descent to the bottom floor from the 10th story. With a spin on her heel, her foot came around at head height, snapping into a violent kick which connected to the next man's head. A tooth and blood ejected his mouth at high speed, before his head smashed into the glass next to the broken window. Blood was in the cracks he formed upon impact. The next soldier tried to grab her from behind. Instead, he felt her elbow in his chest, twice, before she grabbed him, flipping her over her shoulder. He hit the ground, rolling, and just barely fell from the window as well. Shit, 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 she. His voice trailed off as his body gained the distance. With that, she drew the pistol once last time, firing her last chambered round into the head of the man whose head was already resting against the glass. It was enough to cause the glass to shatter, the half-headed body and his brains falling from the building along with the glass. All that remained was the lead. He was trembling. She'd just killed the sergeant and 8 other men, in cold blood. She'd not even really taken a hit. She stood there, absolutely soaked along with him. He could see her breathing, her own chest heaving from the effort she'd exerted so far. His legs and head hurt, badly. Look, he started, trying to find a way to draw his pistol without her closing the gap. We can talk this through, Colonel. It doesn't have to be this way. Her face finally contorted into one of anger. Closing the gap in seconds, she slid between his legs, her body slipping up on the other side before kicking the back of his knee in. Before he could do anything else, her strong hands were already grabbing his jaw and neck. I told you, I don't talk to dead people. She snapped angrily, before snapping his neck. Within seconds, without any ceremony, she kicked the last commando's body out of the building. She felt tired, wet, exhausted and worn out after all that. She was sweating heavily as well. Looking out the window, she saw Raditz. How long had he been there? He seemed almost transfixed on her before smirking broadly when she noticed him. In truth, he'd been watching since he heard gunfire from the building. His immediate concern was the Dragon Balls, of course, and not the well-being of his human counterpart. However, in truth, it had been like watching a masterpiece. Despite the low power level, each of one of her targets were executed quickly, efficiently, and with purpose. They'd had no chance against her. Despite their larger bodies, they underestimated her strength, speed, and intelligence. Were her power level higher, she'd have been quite an asset. Instead, she was a low-level human, weaker even than Kakarot's friends. Still, he appraised her now, covered in sweat, her hands covered in blood. Slowly he hovered into the building. He could hear her still catching her breath. How long were you watching? Violet asked. Long enough to be impressed. Raditz responded, before smirking directly at her. Now then, we have another Dragon Ball to get. The old man who held the Dragon Ball in Piston City was dead within 10 minutes. And the shattered remains of the Central Royal Army. 20 minutes. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, 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 opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. North City. 3 weeks later. Yes. Yes. This time we will surely be successful. Came the maddened cry. 2 hands grasped the 2-star and 1-star Dragon Balls. He'd spent years rebuilding his kingdom, after King Piccolo's. He'd decided the best way to bring in money to finance his Dragon Ball quest was simple. He allowed the Mushroom Forest and his castle to become a banking tax haven for the rich and powerful. To be honest, he'd been kind of shocked at the rate they'd invested money. And now Emperor Pilaf was beginning to see the beginnings of his success. Shu had brought his the Dragon Ball, which the mercenaries had brought him, the other day. That was his second one, and soon he would finally get his wish to be the ruler of the entire world. He had been laughing himself to sleep with joy and anticipation every day since. Mai was out on a mission to try and steal 3 Dragon Balls from Bulma Briefs, especially now since word had come that Goku had been killed by Piccolo Jr. With the Dragon Balls, even Piccolo would be forced to submit to his new authority. Pilaf Tower was his favorite new building, built in North City. It stood above any and all of the other skyscrapers. His penthouse on top of it was reconstructed to look like the peak of his castle. Emperor Pilaf, Shu finally said, after several days of joyous rants from his leader. Mai hasn't returned yet. Maybe it's time we got the mercenaries back to get those Dragon Balls. Shu said nervously. Pilaf stopped, turning towards his minion. He pondered, stopped in front of the radar map he'd had constructed. Yes, I think it's time to bring them back on board. I want my wish, and I want it now. The Emperor decided, before grinning, running back over to his 2 Dragon Balls. Just think. No Goku to stop me. This will be. He stopped, realizing something as he came back to look at the map. 2 Dragon Balls were coming right for them, fast. Shu, what is this? He demanded. The small canine of a creature just looked up, realizing that the 2 Dragon Balls were fast approaching North City as well. Let me find out, my lord. He said, quickly rushing to the balcony and putting on his augmented mechanical binoculars, looking in the direction of the rapidly approaching Dragon Balls. He searched the skies several times, before seeing the black-haired figure, carrying a purple-haired woman by her arm. Shu ran back inside. Emperor Pilaf, it looks like a flying warrior, coming with a woman. Pilaf blinked. A flying warrior. Suddenly the whole building rumbled violently. How could you let this happen? Pilaf immediately shouted to Shu. But Master Pilaf, I did. It was then that a very different voice cut them off. The Dragon Balls. Now, slowly the little blue man turned, seeing the beast of a man standing there, alongside the purple-haired woman. But I worked so hard to get these. Perhaps we can come to some form of an arrangement. Pilaf begged, before grinning. 2 huge rotary machine guns popped out of the floor. Raditz smiled, while Violet looked nervous. You give me your Dragon Balls. More primitive weapons? Raditz queried. Then guns opened fire. Violet felt her life flash before her eyes as the huge cannons literally blew through the building around her and Raditz. She was completely still, totally unable to move for brief seconds. She could almost see the tracers heading towards her before they'd deflect and disappear. Suddenly the 2 big cannons exploded from 2 small, well-placed beams. Pilaf stumbled back, looking towards his failed machines in horror. What? But I'd just got those. They were the best money could buy. He turned back to Raditz, who didn't look impressed. He seemed familiar, this strange man. Suddenly, the tale became apparent. Oh no, not another one of you. He said, feeling shocked and subdued almost, before panic settled in. Look, please, take them, he shouted, rushing over to grab the Dragon Balls before rushing back, laying them at Raditz's feet. I was a fool to challenge you, I recognize your kind now. You're the same as that Goku. I surrender, whatever you want. Violet cleared her throat. Well, maybe if I could get access to his Seifen. There was suddenly a violent explosive wave coursing through the castle as Raditz obliterated Pilaf. The blast exploded out the side of the building as the entire structure shifted and rumbled, flames appearing in the distance. Violet sighed, walking over and picking up the 2 Dragon Balls. Shu was left standing there trembling in terror at Raditz, almost unable to move. Look. IW was just. Raditz cast a glance towards him, rolled his eyes, and unleashed another bolt of energy. No, Shu hadn't even had time to turn and run before his body disappeared into the light, and another blast exploded out the side of the tower. As brick and pillars began to fall from the two huge blasts. In the meantime, Violet had placed the next 2 Dragon Balls in the satchel she'd been using. I think it's time to go, Raditz said, about to grab Violet by her arm before she stepped back. No, you aren't dragging me by my arm again, she snapped. Raditz rolled his eyes. You can be infuriating, woman, he said bluntly, grasping her by the side of her waist instead, and hovering into the air, blasting off. We should really renegotiate our agreement. Violet started. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. The Watchtower. Cammy's frame stood at the edge of the watchtower, his eyes ever present in their protective gaze upon the earth. Things looked very bad, cities in flame, destruction wrought across a whole continent. The mad quest of the Saiyan Raditz for the Dragon Balls was putting the whole world in danger, let alone the fact he eventually intended to annihilate humanity to sell this world. Cammy closed his eyes for a moment as there was another blast, clearly bringing a building down. He was on his way to the Capsule Corporation's headquarters, likely to destroy the facilities there, but worst of all to collect the last 3 Dragon Balls. Behind him, Tien, Krillin, Chiatsu, and Yamcha all stood behind him helplessly, having ceased their brutal training briefly for an update on the planet's situation. We have to stop him now, Tien finally said. Ready or not, we have to confront him before he kills even more people. Yamcha nodded in agreement. Please Cammy, we have to do something. Cammy. Goku's voice noised inside of his mind. Goku. Goku, is that you? Cammy asked, looking up, his mouth half open in amazement. Yay, of course it is. Krillin immediately looked despondent at Cammy speaking seemingly to himself. Oh, I think Cammy is starting to show his age, he said quietly to Tien. Cammy's irritated gaze turned towards Krillin. Senility. He was implying his mind was being lost to the passage of time. His hand tightly balled around his staff, turning his head to almost glare through Krillin. I am not senile. I was talking with Goku, now stop interrupting, he ordered. The fighters all stood there, looking at him in bewilderment as Yajirobe walked over, eating an overcooked piece of ham. Sorry I'm late, he said, chewing with a full mouth. Cammy, what's the situation on the Earth? Cammy sighed. I am sorry Goku, but Raditz has started on his campaign of destruction. He's torn apart 3 cities and an entire mountain range gathering the Dragon Balls. He is now headed towards Capsule Corp to take the remaining 3 Dragon Balls which Bulma had gathered. If he gains all the Dragon Balls, he and his comrades will destroy this world. Cammy lamented. Bulma's in danger. You have to do something. On King Kai's planet, Goku looked worried, almost terrified. All those people dead, all because he hadn't been able to stop Raditz sooner. And now one of his best friends was in danger trying to help him. There had to be something, anything he could do. His power has only grown since your last encounter. I am not sure anyone on Earth can stop him now, Cammy admitted. Tien's 3 eyes traced down, the others following suit. They had trained so hard, but Kami didn't think they had the power to stop this villain. The Saiyans won't arrive for another month, but Raditz may have the last laugh. Is there anyone there who can do anything to hold him off, or steal the Dragon Balls? I am afraid not. I can't. Kami stopped, his eyes tracing towards the world in disbelief. What is it, Kami? Piccolo, he said. His power has grown exceptionally, and he is flying directly towards where Raditz is. He is truly formidable now, he must have been suppressing it for months. Can Piccolo do it? I am not positive. Raditz may even still have the edge. Not for long, Krillin said, hovering in the air. Yamcha smiled, beginning to hover himself. That's right, can't let Piccolo steal all the glory. My training is almost complete. You have to stop Raditz with anything you can. Please. This time, King Kai allowed Goku's voice to travel through all their minds. We won't let you down, Goku. Krillin shouted, before taking off, the others following. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, 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 opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Goku felt the connection break as King Kai turned to him. This may be very bad, Goku. I know, especially since the other two Saiyans' power is so immense as well. They need to stop Raditz now, otherwise we may never be able to stop them. King Kai nodded, before smiling. But with all that said, let's get back to working on the spirit bomb. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, 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 opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Bulma watched in terror as the 5 Dragon Balls approached the Capsule Corp building on her radar. She clicked her capsule outside, throwing out a jet. With a poof it appeared. He must have been on the outskirts of West City now, and she knew she had to get distance as soon as she could. Without these Dragon Balls, Goku would be left in the afterlife forever. Not only did she have to keep them safe from that psychopath Raditz, she had to find a way to get the other balls away from him. Before she could enter the jet, however, an arching silver bolt of energy crashed into it, blasting the vehicle away in a flash and leaving a crater. Bulma was knocked back, falling on her hands and ass before blinking, her eyes wide. Bulma's heart raced at 1,000 miles a second when she turned to look up at what was happening. It was too late, he was close enough to fire bolts like that. Getting up, Bulma immediately made a break for the Capsule Corp building, only to find another bolt blasting into the dome, causing an explosion and blazing inferno. Her parents were in danger now, not just her. Oh no, she whispered, before the 2 figures landed behind her. Hand over the Dragon Balls. And I may spare your life. Raditz lied, with a glint of amusement. Finally, Raditz though, he'd have all the Dragon Balls, and then it was just a matter of waiting for Vegeta and Raditz to arrive. Violet let go of him, standing to the side of him. Who's the idiot? Bulma asked, implying to Violet. Don't you get that he'll kill you too? Bulma asked Violet. Violet smiled ruthlessly back. Raditz, of course, started to chuckle. With an attitude like that, who knows, you just may live, woman. He said, before stepping forward, forming an energy blast. I don't need you anyway. Tell Kakarot I said hello from hell, would you? Raditz chuckled, before preparing to hurl his at the defenseless Bulma. The ball went flying off course just as it was launched. Violet's jaw dropped slightly at what she just saw. Just as Raditz fired, a mighty twin kick came down from the sky, crashing into him. Flying at full speed and now coming in with the blow was none other than the Piccolo. Easily sent off his feet, Raditz went soaring through the air, crashing through the perimeter wall and crashing into skyscraper a street over. Debris flew out of the building with the impact. The ground began to rumble as Raditz started to come to, realizing what had just occurred. From the base floor the building collapsed, layer after layer of floors slamming down on one another before a violent explosion sent the remains of the building in all directions. Raditz, his clothes slightly torn, stepped from the wreckage breathing angrily, one of his fists balled. You just don't learn very well, do you? I might surprise you. Piccolo responded. You there, Bulma? Piccolo ordered. Get the Dragon Balls and get out of here. I'll deal with him. Violet for her part was left in shock, stunned. King Piccolo. Perhaps he would defeat Raditz. She wasn't sure, but what she did know was that Raditz looked furious. After I'm done with you, Piccolo, I'll finish with her. Raditz snarled. It was always there. He could feel it. He could feel that power nagging him in the background every moment he was awake. In meditation, in training himself, when training Gohan. It was not only an insult to him, but an example of his weakness. Raditz's power was overwhelming by comparison to his own, even after his defeat. Were Raditz not so grievously wounded, and without his tracking equipment, Piccolo had little to no doubt that he and the others would have been finished in short order. That was his drive. He trained every day to achieve more power to stop Raditz, not to save the world, but to finally overcome the obstacle he faced. As it was, Piccolo floated above a huge ravine, his arms crossed over his chest, his mind training along with his body as he concentrated. Inside his mind, a mind certainly void of calm thoughts, he struggled to find an inner way to expand himself, not just in power, but in mind. The struggle alone was the training. Do you two idiots really think you can keep this up? He finally said. Allow me to show you how wrong you are. He'd not kept up. He and Goku had gotten lucky because Raditz had been arrogant, and because of Gohan's power. But he was still more powerful. His power was terrifying and Piccolo could feel it every moment as it healed, awaiting for its time to re-emerge. He had to be stronger. He had to be the strongest, in fact. Eyes closed tighter for a moment before Piccolo's eyes slowly opened. It was time to train again. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Months later, Gohan looked haggard, worn, and beaten. The child tried to get up again as he struggled to push on. Mr. Piccolo, he was about to complain, until he realized Piccolo's eyes were harshly upon him. He swallowed, nodding. This kid had huge potential, he could be stronger than all of them. There was a side of Piccolo that warned that the boys should be eliminated after they dealt with Raditz and his friends, but he'd cross that bridge when it came to that. He'd come to learn from Kami, who he'd been dealing with recently, much to his revulsion, that Goku was heading towards King Kai's planet for training, to return to fight the Saiyans. He thought it was ironic that he'd supposedly come to save all of them when he was unable to save himself before. Still, if these new warriors coming were anything even close to Raditz, or worse, he had to be ready. Gohan also needed to be prepared, and even now he'd improved beyond Piccolo's comprehension. He'd toughed up largely, he could fight hard, very hard. In fact, if Gohan had been there when Raditz had landed a year ago, in his current shape, he doubted they'd have struggled as they had in that battle. Raditz, he felt, had expanded in power after their battle, but hadn't felt any great leaps or improvements in his fighting potential since then. Even as he knew he'd been healing, he'd become lazy, he was willing to bet he was simply waiting on the other Saiyans to arrive. A being at the top of a mountain didn't feel the same urge to climb. Gohan found his feet, looking up towards Piccolo, his own posture ready for another round of battle. Again, Piccolo instructed, and with that, Gohan blasted off towards him, launching into a new series of attacks. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Gohan stood next to Piccolo, now bearing attire similar to Piccolo. "Mr. Piccolo, do you feel that?" Gohan asked. Piccolo felt it, his appearance demonstrated that he did, and Gohan knew it. There was a look of uncertainty and nervousness, even signs of sweat written across his master's body language and features. It was a terrible power now moving on North City, they could feel it. Gohan knew all too well who it was, his uncle, the man responsible most for his father's death. His two hands clenched together. All those helpless people were being killed, destroyed, and no one had done anything about it. "Yay, I feel it, kid," Piccolo responded. He wasn't ready yet, he knew it. If he fought Raditz now he'd surely lose, whether Raditz had gotten sloppy or not. And he'd die for what? He felt him around North City now. He felt the lives being blown out like tiny candles, thousands of them. Their deaths didn't particularly bother him, but it bothered him enough to feel Raditz able to rampage without a repercussion. For the first time in his life, he actually missed Goku. He'd have not tolerated this a moment, flying heedlessly into battle to stop this threat. It was a shocking revelation that Piccolo had felt, realizing that he not only missed Goku, but needed his help to deal with this madman. When he turned to look at Gohan, he saw the boy was frightened, in many ways like he was. He felt Raditz's power just as much as he did, he must have felt just as helpless. "Mr. Piccolo, somebody's gotta stop him," Gohan finally said. Gohan felt his fear beginning to shift, though it was still there, he felt a panicked kind of anger as well before he looked up at Piccolo. "We can't just stand by. We've got to stop him or he'll destroy everything. And he'll get the Dragon Balls. And if he does that, there is no way we could stop him, or bring my dad back." Piccolo had idly been thinking of the Dragon Balls in the back of his mind. He almost felt his heart stop when it became clear to him that was why his rampage was directed to North City. He was after Dragon Balls. He felt the power shifting west now, ignoring areas of resistance even. He was after the Dragon Balls. Goku's friend Bulma had been collecting them as well. Goku wasn't here, Goku was dead. He wasn't a hero by any means, he didn't want to be a hero even, not to anyone. He was Piccolo, a powerful warrior and son of the great demon King Piccolo. He was not some damned hero. But he also wasn't a fool. If Goku wasn't here, that meant it fell to him. He would have to stop Raditz, whether he was ready or not. He'd run out of time to prepare to beat him. It was either victory or death for them, and it was like that now. Gohan, follow my lead. Piccolo ordered. Gohan smiled finally, looking at Piccolo. Are we going to do what I think we are? Yay, we're going to stop Raditz. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis 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 opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Kami's eyes had been following him for some time now. He could almost feel them on his back. He felt nervous the entire time still, attempting to get his mind in order. If he went into battle as disorganized as he was, he'd be finished for sure. He had to play on his own strengths and limit Raditz's, but most important of all, he needed to keep Raditz off balance. He needed to use his arrogance and rage to handle him. Their powers had closed in distance significantly, but even now a realistic estimate to how much of a margin remained could not be made. The one thing he did know, however, was that Raditz would be stronger. He could still feel in depth to that amount. It really depended if his fighting power would change dramatically once the fight actually got underway. Turning to face Gohan briefly, Piccolo uttered words he knew were needed. Keep your distance from when the fighting starts. He said to him. Be ready to step, but only when you see an opportunity. He's much stronger than you right now and would annihilate you head on, understand? Gohan nodded, trying to contain his fear and replace it with the face of bravery. Right. It was then that Piccolo felt the other powers starting to move. Krillin, Tien, Yamcha, Chiatsu, they were all converging now as well. Good. He was going to need any help he could get in this fight, though they were lagging seriously behind, having only launched to follow Raditz just then. He and Gohan would arrive much sooner. West City came into view as the pair made their way there. It's starting, Piccolo said, noting as explosions burst from the side of the Capsule Corporation's headquarters. He picked up his speed, pressing himself as hard as he could. He needed to go faster. He felt himself being pushed to the limits. Finally, his eyes locked onto his target. Time seemed to freeze when he saw Raditz and the purple-haired woman come into view. Raditz appeared ready to kill Bulma with an energy blast. Shifting his body in mid-air on his dive towards Raditz, Piccolo dropped both his feet in front of his body, guiding himself like a missile, aiming for Raditz's head. It turned out he aimed well. The 2 feet collided with his face, warping flesh and shoving his head violently, before his body followed. First he went through a small parameter wall, and then crashing through into the bottom levels of a nearby skyscraper. The building then collapsed on top of Raditz himself. The earth seemed to start to rumble, as bits of debris at first started to push off the shattered remains of the building. Finally, the shattered fragments of building blasted aside as Raditz walked from the wreckage, looking furious. His body was covered in small scratches and his clothes were ripped as his eyes stared hatefully at Piccolo. "You don't learn very well, do you? I might surprise you," Piccolo responded. "I'd better surprise him," Piccolo thought. "You there, Bulma," Piccolo ordered. "Get the Dragon Balls and get out of here. I'll deal with him." Bulma watched briefly, before nodding frantically, heading into the Capsule Corp building, which was still set ablaze on the upper levels. "After I'm done with you, Piccolo, I'll finish with her," Raditz snarled. Piccolo tossed his cloak away, the weighted material smashing against the solid earth, before discarding his turban as well. Raditz just felt his hand trembling, angrily, his closed fist looking to seek out this scum and destroy it. It was written on his facial features as well. This was his last best opportunity to collect those Dragon Balls, and this underpowered green slug had just sneak attacked him. It was a lucky shot, and nothing more. He remembered how weak this green fool was, and he'd make an example of him. "Woman," Raditz said bluntly, "take the Dragon Balls to somewhere safe. I will deal with this irritating bug," he ordered. Violet looked back towards Raditz, before looking at Piccolo. To Raditz he realized she was weighing her options. His black eyes seemed to intensify angrily. He'd spared her and this was how she repaid him. However, after several seconds, she made a run for it, from both of them. "Now then," Raditz said, his face twisting to one of anger. "I'm going to finish you off like I should have before." His body seemed to blur into pure speed, flying directly at Piccolo with his right arm braced to intercept a counterattack, and the other preparing to strike. Piccolo, for his part, realized Raditz's attack strategy. He could see it for the first time. Despite the immense power of his attacker, he held his ground and let Raditz's image pass through him. The image of the Saiyan moved past him, his real body coming in with a devastating left hook, only to find it blocked by Piccolo's arm flexing in the way just in time. The two fighters froze where they were, Raditz's forearm against Piccolo's. Piccolo felt a realization: he could keep up with Raditz's movements. He could follow his images and after images, and not only that, he was fast enough to block incoming attacks, and strong enough to hold on. For Piccolo, a new sense of confidence had arisen in the first few moments of this fight, leading to a confident smile appearing across his face. For Raditz, by contrast, there was a sense of underestimation. Piccolo had just blocked his attack, and worse, had gotten the first blow on him. Even now he could almost sense the power within him, and began to subtly realize though he was stronger than his adversary, the gulf between them was by no means as great as it had once been. When the smile appeared across Piccolo's face, Raditz just scowled in response. Within another second, the two began their brutal exchange. Blows passed by Piccolo and Raditz as each moved with speeds Gohan couldn't even follow at first. Slowly the two lifted into the air, before sounds like high-pitched thunder began to echo out. Blows were finally landing. A green arm thrust towards Raditz's head. With a dodge to the side, the Saiyan warrior slammed his first into the Namek's ribs, and he dropped a blow on the exposed warrior's face a second later. Instead of flying back as he had before in their first fight, however, Piccolo was still there. Within a second the green warrior's elbow slammed into Raditz's chest, and his knee arched up, slamming into his gut. Gasping for breath for the briefest of seconds, Raditz struck back. When the two figures began to blur across the sky, the sounds of thunder followed them. Gohan was left watching this, before finally a particularly powerful blow was heard. Raditz had finally managed to get the drop on Piccolo. Both of his arms came crashing down violently on Piccolo's back, sending the would-be savior rapidly descending down towards the Capsule Corp building. The impact Piccolo's body made on the top of the flaming building made the entire structure rumble. When he started to get up, Piccolo almost snarled. His body was now covered in scratches as well. Purple blood trickled from his lip as he grunted sitting up. Looking up at the new skylight his body had made, he looked for Raditz, until he heard whimpering next to him. Bulma stood there trembling at the sight of him, holding a pouch to her side, which he was guessing were the Dragon Balls she'd acquired. I told you to get out of here. Piccolo snapped angrily before pain exploded in the side of his head. He'd not kept track of Raditz, being distracted by Goku's stupid friend, and now he would pay the price for it. His body broke through the side of the Capsule Corporation's headquarters. Still he trailed through the air, before Raditz appeared above him, hands glowing with a red energy beam. You put up a good fight, but it's time for you to die, he declared. Piccolo's eyes widened as he raised his arms in defense of himself. The blast that came out of the Saiyan's hands was a direct hit. Red light and energy flowed over his body, burning away at flesh, as the final wave of pressure from it blasted his smoking body to the ground. Piccolo lay there, his body smoldering, his arms having become bloody burnt stumps. Trying to bring himself to his feet, instead he found Raditz dropping from the sky, landing another vicious kick, this one cratering his body into the earth below him. Everything hurt. Still, he clenched his teeth attempting to fight off the pain. He had to find a way to overcome this monster. A hand grabbed his head, pulling him up and into the air. Do you need a hand? Raditz asked with an amused grin. Raditz for his part had started to feel energy from Piccolo, coming from somewhere. It was a feeling he could hardly describe, but he could sense it. And he could sense it focusing even. He wasn't sure how this sense worked, but it was almost an instinct. But what could Piccolo possibly do at this point? Choke on this, you bastard. Piccolo thought as he finished focusing his energy, his eyes widening as he flowed power through them. Two focused beams of energy blasted from his eyes, hitting Raditz in the chest as the Saiyan's eyes widened in shock to contrast Piccolo's furious ones. No. Raditz felt his body being driven back by the focused beam, burning through his clothes and scorching his chest. It was strong enough finally that he was sent flailing back, crashing through several small buildings, each one ripping against him, tearing at the fabric of his clothes and scratching his flesh. Finally the beam died out. He'd spent too much energy, of course Piccolo realized. He fell to one knee now, trying to gather enough of his strength again to begin the process of regeneration. Breathing became almost difficult at this point, but his body slowly started the process of marshalling his body's potential to rebuild lost limbs and repair damaged flesh and bones. When his eyes traced up, however, he could see the rage-filled Raditz blasting towards him. I'll kill you. With a violent knee he continued his, only to find Piccolo's knee raised to block it. Raditz took advantage of his still existing arms, punching Piccolo with a haymaker, sending him skidding across the dirt and grass outside the Capsule Corp building. Piccolo's body stopped its brutal grind against the ground a moment later. How did you think you were going to beat me with no arms? You are weaker than I am, wounded, and now you are dead. He stopped, however, realizing something. If I kill him, I kill the Dragon Balls. He nonetheless gathered the energy to his palm. There had to be a way around that, or perhaps the catalyst had lied to him. It was then that he felt something behind him. Raditz turned his head, seeing the brat. His nephew who'd badly damaged his chest nearly a year earlier. You? Raditz asked, looking mildly disgusting. It was Gohan, wasn't it? You look mad. Don't tell me you intend to challenge me. I'm much stronger than the last time we met. He mocked. Leave Mr. Piccolo alone. Raditz felt that strange energy again, he could barely quantify it. He wished in that moment he had his scouter, so he could fully understand what he was feeling, but it was the same feeling he got before Piccolo had blasted him with his eye beams. He could almost understand and feel the energies of the creatures around him. TV guides in reference. Masenko. The boy's arms clasped together, before thrusting towards his uncle. Raditz's smirk disappeared when he fully grasped what was being thrown at him. At the last moment his hands raised to block the blast, the golden blast wave hitting his palms in a violent exchange of energy. He was barely able to hold the blast bolt back, feeling as if it would overwhelm him. No, not like this. Raditz muttered through grit teeth before he started to form his own blast under the wave. 2 red bolts finally managed to form, before the wave disappeared and shattered. He needed to breathe but ignored that need for the moment.